So Javier, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Floor, the air. What is mine? All right.
The digital floor.
The digital screen. This is becoming very ethereal, everything. So, all right. Nice to see you all. I mean, we've been here before, most of us. So, a conversation among friends, I hope it will be. And that makes it much easier for me. I know that I have a friendly ear. So, that makes it all much easier. So, we're going to go through this was Ralph's proposal that we do a six-part series on the urgency of change. This is one of Krishnamurti's, is considered, let's put it that way, one of Krishnamurti's core works, bibliographies. Sort of, you can take it as a general reference. What we did last time, in a similar fashion, was on freedom from the known, which is considered, or was by Mary Lutjens, who put it together as a primer of Krishnamurti's teachings. So we're doing a little bit of that together with Ralph, of sort of going through some basic Krishnamurti works as a way to start basically giving a general perspective on Krishnamurti's teachings. And last time it came out well. I don't know how it will come out this time, because I like to do it directly without notes, and that's always a risk I take. I like to have some life coming into me at the moment I'm speaking, that something that comes naturally through understanding, because I prepare it, right? So it's not all, how you call it, ad lib. But I like to say to myself, see if you can understand it yourself. So that's my task, my challenge to myself. I don't want to just speak from what I take from Kay just as such. For that, the books are there already. So we'll try to sort of get a bit of the gist of it, and then we'll discuss it together. It's important, of course, that you read the material yourself. This is the original. I'm going to sort of talk also from my own perspective, so I'm sure I'm missing things as I go. At the same time, I try to get to the core so that we can sort of that can serve as a basis for touching the common ground which affects us all, which is what Krishnamurti is trying to address. What is our human condition, how we can understand ourselves, and through that understanding, bring about a radical transformation. That hasn't happened yet, but the understanding goes on, I trust. So we start, there are so many little chapters. This book, basically just to give a little introduction about the book, is composed, if you looked at it, of a series of chapters which begin with a question. This was put together by Alain Naudet, who was Krishnamurti's secretary at the time, and Krishnamurti himself. Basically, Alain Naudet posed questions to Krishnamurti, and Krishnamurti dictated his answers to Alain Naudet. Then he asked another question, and they kept going like this together. So this book was put together by them in this fashion. I think sometimes Alain Naudet poses as someone else. He sort of asks questions although he were someone else, some character. He was not married, for example, and some of the people who ask these questions are married, or they are monks. He wasn't a monk, and so on. So they're sort of bringing different situations in which they can bring out different aspects of Krishnamurti's concern, but with a basis, existential basis. So I like that a lot, that is an existential basis. Is similar to commentaries on living, in that they try to address real issues, of course, with relation to Krishnamurti's teachings, because Krishnamurti is giving the answers, I suppose, in this case. So that makes it very interesting, because gives a little more, how you say, Krishnamurti has to get down sometimes to the nitty-gritty of these very issues that we face. So that is what is interesting about it. In terms of my attempt to do this series, this was a bit more challenging than Freedom from the Known, because, and this is a risk I'm taking, that's what I'm bringing it in, which is Freedom from the Known somehow ended up, I managed to thread the themes through quite neatly, because somehow they lend themselves to that kind of order, because I think Mary Lutjens though he put the text in her own order, managed to keep Krishnamurti's general thread. And so that was helpful. And I was able to track that, to trace that, and therefore it was easier to make such an exposition. In this case, it's all over the place. There is no such order. So I have to invent an order, which is not necessarily complete and not necessarily as coherent as it was then. So, for example, for today, we have how to live in this world. This seemed to me to be a very important question for our time, and I think for all time. Humanity has had this question for ages. I think since the dawn of consciousness, or even before. I don't know if the monkey asked any questions, but there we are. I think it's been there since the beginning. And look what I put together. So I suggested a series of other chapters to go along with this one, right? If you saw the program that I put together, so I put there plus chapters on conflict, which is, of course, a very important challenge that we face in living in the world. And in fact, it may be the very cause as to why we ask the question, how to live in the world, because there is so much conflict. The individual and the community, because that is one of the primary spheres in which that conflict takes place. We live in relationship in society. And one of the issues that arises right off is our relationship with our parents, with our family, with the society in which we live, with the culture, with the government, the type of everything that the society gives us. Society tries to make us into its own image, right? And the human being, like Krishnamurti said, always is beyond the citizen. The citizen is one thing, is the social animal, but the human being goes beyond the citizen. And the citizen is always trying to dominate the human being. And when he does that, he destroys him. So wait a minute, there's a danger here. And then I put in suicide. Now, why would you put suicide in such a series? Well, because I read it and it's not about suicide. It is and it isn't, right? So I will address that, of course, as we go, right? But basically, imagine, I can make a very simple, straight connection. Suicide, you can look at it as the action of living, of the meaninglessness of living. The action you take when life no longer has a meaning, when you cannot take it, is a desperate action. There may be other reasons and other ways, but fundamentally it seems when things just break down so far that the individual sees no longer any meaning in living. So they take themselves out of it. So you can see that suicide will be related to in that way to how to live in this world. That is in a way you can look at suicide as as the answer that it doesn't make sense to live in this world. We have failed to understand how to live in this world. So we take the way out. We get out of this world because you can't live in it. So you die. And order, because it is about order at the end of the day. If things were in order in our lives, harmony and so on, then we wouldn't even think about it. We wouldn't even ask the question. Everything is in order. Our relationships are in order. Things are in order. How to live in this world? What do you mean? We're living. We're all right, you see. There's no longer even the question doesn't arise. So that's the way I put it together after reading the book. As I say, not all of these chapters fit neatly into my headings. So that is one factor of greater potential incoherence in terms of how we're going to bring this across, right? So Miles, you're warned. Don't expect the same perfection. So, right, so how to live in this world, this is how Krishnamurti starts. And I think that's a very valid question. It's a general valid question, is what we're all concerned with. How to live, how we're living, right? And of course, as I say, I had that question as a kid. I think you also had it, probably. When I was a little kid, I realized that the way human beings were living, in my opinion, and maybe it is the Spanish way, life was tragic. Maybe everybody makes too much noise here. Everybody's overly emotional, so everything is a bit more dramatic. But it was tragic. There was a struggle, conflict, violence, sorrow, and irrationality just about everywhere you looked. And of course, that meant we were living also under a dictatorship. So it was authoritarianism everywhere, and every very what do you call it, patriarchal. So the patriarchs never laughed. For some reason, laughter was almost forbidden. How can you forbid laughter? The child will naturally laugh. Well, no, it wasn't allowed. The patriarchs were embittered by life, and they made sure that we were embittered by their bitterness, and they wouldn't even allow us to be children and to be happy and to jump about. So this was a misery, and it was everywhere. Society as the structure into which anyone who's born in it must fit per decree from above. So you have to believe what the society believes, even if there are so many contradictions in that belief that you can't possibly rationally accept it. They emphasize rationality at the same time because they send you to school and they have you do mathematics. But you can't possibly, if you apply mathematics to the belief, then the belief falls apart, right? So they create contradictions in the psyche so that you find yourself that if you fit into society, you can't be rational. And if you're rational, even at that level, you can't fit into society. So there is a conflict right away between the individual, so called, and the society. Right? I felt it very strongly, and I think most of my generation did, because of what I'm describing in my particular circumstances. But most of us had it even in the family, not just the state or the religion or the education, but the family itself is a source and a ground, a field of conflict, of oppression, of trauma in many ways. Most people have been traumatized by their own families, not just at school by the bullying, like I was, but at home as well. Domestic violence, the continuous imposition of irrational authority by the paterfamilias and the rest. So, this is what is happening. The disorder for most of us has been evident. In my case, it was so extreme, and I may have shared this with you already, most of you. It was so extreme that I felt that I had been born in the wrong place at the wrong time among the wrong people. Think about it. A boy of 9 thinks that. It's a horrible thought. This boy was not fitting anywhere. I mean, you can see that that's a ground for suicide, right? I wasn't suicidal, but you can see that the total separation, the total sense of dislocation, displacement, and disconnection was complete. That was the thought that comes into this kid's mind. How does he even think that? Right? Well, I don't know what he was thinking and exactly why, but it was the sense of breaking down of relationship. What is the world? Is the sum total of our relationships with things, with people, and ideas. That's the world, and that is living. So, world and living, what does it mean to live in the world? It means this, it means the complex network of relationships and whether there is order or disorder in it. And what we find, most of us, is that there is disorder. So the question of how to live in this world is addressing that fact, that perception, and the call from all of us for order, for beauty, for understanding, for love, for all that, all those good things, for just harmony. Even simple kindness would do. And it seems it's hard to find, right? I mean, hopefully we're moving in the right direction, but there is a sadness to it that mankind has carried for a long time in terms of not understanding the right way to relate, the right way to relate to things, to people, to each other, to ideas, how to handle those things. The fragmentation, as we know, has been pretty thorough, inwardly and outwardly. The church fragmented my psyche, but so did other things, right? And the society was a class society, was a dictatorial society. In the name of order, they were creating tremendous disorder, oppression, sorrow, violence, and sorrow. This is the world. That's why Krishnamurti at one point, I think in these readings, said, to live in the world, you must abandon the world, deny the world. Now, you can't just deny the world because we live in it. And the worst part of it is that we are that world. No, that is just terrible. I want to get out. I want to get out of my family. I want to get out of this society because beyond the horizon that I see, there must be other people I can talk to, like you, my friends. So that we as human beings can talk to each other for the love of Jesus, which is the God we had. So, all right, talk to people. You're a human being. You have your flaws, you have your weaknesses, you have also your qualities, right? You may be sensitive in this area or in that area, or talented this way or so way, and so on. You're just a human being. You intend to relate and to relate well. That's goodness. That's living rightly in the world, right? Basically, right? But you can't, because wherever you go, you take the world with you. That movement may be still necessary. For me, it was necessary. You move outside your circumstance because that becomes too oppressive. You may have to leave the family. You may have to leave your particular society. You may have to turn your back on dictatorship, the church and his nonsense, or his goodness too, the truth, and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you have to abandon these things. You have to turn your back. You have to make a move for your freedom. You say, I'm standing for my freedom. I'm standing for my humanity. I'm standing for health and wholeness. And maybe I'll break my neck in the process. Why not? To live is to live dangerously. And freedom is risk taking. What do they say? Nothing ventured, nothing gained. All right. Well, yes, but nothing ventured, you may be nothing gained. Meaning, you venture everything and you lose it all. Who said you have to win anyway? This is not a game. This is what life will give you. So you have to make that move. To live in this world means to stand also for freedom. When you find this disorder, you have to act and do something. When I find that disorder in myself, which I do, because my father's aggression is my aggression, I am aggressive, I am lustful, I'm proud, I'm jealous, I'm what am I not? But the whole spectrum of the 10, or the what is it, the 7 deadly sins, they live with me. They somehow, it's like, a nest of wasps in my little, attic. I have to deal with that. I am that. And therefore, changing the world, which is what we want to do, and dictatorships, and this oppression, this dogmatism, authoritarian impositions, intimidations, punishment, abuse of all sorts, then I have to change. The seeds of that world is me. That's why Kay says it's one to one. What's happening out there is the result of what consciousness is. If it's fragmented out there, it's because you're fragmented in yourself. Now, am I fragmented in myself? Is that what the world is? Well, yes. I mean not to be violent, but I am violent. I mean not to be lustful, but I am lustful. I mean not to be jealous, but I am jealous. So the contradiction is not just created by society, but by consciousness itself. And contradiction is at the core of disorder. I am disorder. What? This poor chap. Well, why was he born? To face the heir to all this. Right? This is what we are heir to. Right? So that's how to live in this world. Life is relationship, and the world is that, is the sum total of our relationships, what we make of it, from this consciousness that is in a contradiction with itself, due to its own desires. Desire is somewhere at the core of it, right? The lust, the pride, the envy, the jealousy, the aggression, they're all centered on me. It's me. is my desires, what I want for myself. The self-interest is really core. And that is not difficult to see, right? That it is one's own dominant desires, an imposition of those desires, not understanding the division and conflict they cause that bring about the kind of breakdown of relationship. What breaks down relationship? Krishnamurti is very concerned with that, right? And what breaks it down, he says, is, let's look at it together when we discuss it, is the isolation, separation, division the self itself brings to it. Because it's me first, is my satisfaction, and the other is just an object for me. The same with things, the same with ideas. We're seeking security. We're seeking to bind the world to our own happiness, to our own safety, to our own becoming. To live in this world, how to live in this world. This is the world we make, and from where we make it. This inner source is the world. This is the inner source of the world. Desire, security, pleasure, and becoming. And those are very well ingrained in human consciousness. And that's the me. That's the me. And Kay says the me is time. Now, I didn't get that. I said, what? Time? What time am I? See, he says, there will be no peace in the world because as long as we stick with or stay with or identify with, remain within the sphere of self and its time. The self has its own time. I found that expression very interesting. Self and time. Self and its time. What is the time of the self? How does the self mean time? Well, we normally say because it is an identification with the past. There will be no self without a past, right? That I think is logical, sane, factual, right? I need a history. There's a memory behind it. There's an identification. This can be seen also not just individually but collectively, right? The collective selves are usually even easier to see because they naturally a group of people have to adopt an identity in order to function as such a group. So they adopt an identity. And what is that identity? Is derived from their history. There will be no collective, national, religious, or any of those identities without a history. The history becomes the self. You cut off the history from these identities, and the identity disappears. You can see that. You take the Bible, see, look, think about it. In the very world I was born in, you take the Bible away, and a lot of people's authority disappears. You take the history of Spain away, and Franco did not exist. You take the history of my family away, and my father might have been a totally different human being. And so might I. History is a determinant, is a conditioning. But of course, not just the specific history people remember, but it is the ingrained history of the psyche itself, which has deeper layers of remembered time, of a time when we were not even necessarily human. The monkey is alive. The instinctual forces of the animal are still alive in us. So how to live in this world brings the monkey up there, because the monkey is the one who really knows how to survive. We're still in a survival mode. And the monkey says, in order to survive, you organize yourself in this way. In tribal structures, you pursue security, therefore you have to have your territory. And within the territory, you have a hierarchical structure, which gives special rights, sexual rights to the leaders. If you apply that very picture of a monkey organization to our current world, you will see that there's a lot of monkeys still around, in my view. All right? We have not evolved in that regard. The thought, which has come as a higher function of the brain, has been hooked to this lower brain as fundamentally informing his aims. Psychologically, if we look at ourselves, have an awareness of ourselves, we will see that there is still the same drives: the drive for pleasure, the drive for security, and the drive for power or position. That's what we are concerned with when we are alone and the brain runs on its own. It's a program. The conditioning is very alive and active, and we're not even aware of it. We just think that's us, that this is our freedom and our being is determined by this programming. But it's not us at all. Well, it is and it isn't. It is in the sense that it's running and we are just conditioned by it and act accordingly. But the result is this division, this conflict, perpetual with each other. Everybody's in the same mode, but we're competing for those very objects, for pleasure, for security, for position, for power. What else are the movies all about? We've been telling ourselves this movie forever because we're in that movie. It's moving around. You see, there are no new themes very much, at least in Hollywood anyway. There are other, fortunately, alternative filmmakers which are looking at subtler questions. But anyway, the fundamental factors are these, the motivations are there, and then you just have variations, permutations on these fundamental themes. Pleasure, fear, and pain, fundamental principles of consciousness. Thought as the operating system, time as the background, and self as the principle of our own identity. The structure of consciousness is not so difficult. To map it to that degree. But then it becomes very subtle because consciousness creates its own reality. So when we say living in the world, we say live according to whatever we have already acquired. The Christian has to live according to Christianity, the Jew according to Judaism, and the Muslim according to Islam, and the Hindu according to communist, capitalist. We take sides, we take fragments, we identify, we accumulate, we think that's truth, and we fragment. Fragmentation is the fundamental issue. Why do we fragment? What is it that fragments? Right? This is the basic question. Now, Krishnamurti says all this process of isolation is suicidal. I'm going to talk about suicide. Not a pleasant subject, and it's not suicide I'm really going to talk about. Okay, so the question was asked, is it intelligent at any point to commit suicide? That was the question that they posed to him. And Krishnamurti said basically, no, it's not intelligent ever. Why? Because intelligence is to see what is and act immediately. Therefore, it will never reach the point of despair, of profound frustration or meaninglessness. Intelligence is the ground of meaning. But we spend our lives destroying. We destroy intelligence. He says, a way of living, see how to live in this world. He says it's to live intelligently, with love, sensitivity, compassion. That's it. Easy to say, no? And beautiful. We should be reminded maybe, right? It's not like to live in this world is to fight for power, to compete with others and get to the top and let them, eat cake. I don't know whose father said that to his son, but I'm sure some did. Is a premise of our time. Now he says, no, it's to live with sensitivity, to live with intelligence and love. And that means living without self. The self is the principle of isolation, and suicide is the escape from isolation, is escape from life. So we are escaping from life by isolating ourselves in our images. He even says the man who's wrapped up in his own image is committing suicide. I didn't know I was suicidal. That my very identification with my own self-image is a way of destroying life, is moving away from life and therefore destroying it. Life is contact. Life is relationship. Life is union. And the self is splitting, dividing. It creates its own illusion of union, of course. It does. It has to. Cannot escape it. It must be a very fundamental drive. But it doesn't know what it means because the union is according to an idea. It's just an image that is trying to confirm. But that very image stands between it and what is. So it's suicidal. It's breaking down life. It's destroying connection. And suicide can be seen, I think there are other views, as I said, as that moment of total despair when you reach the cliff of having absolutely no connection with anything or anyone. And the self is driving at that, is the very principle of that total isolation. So isolation is the issue. How do we isolate ourselves? Why is this self so strong, right? The image. The image would be suicidal. Now, I remember as a kid, just to anecdotal factor, that there was some older man. I knew this older man was in the village from another village down the road, and one day he went completely mad. He lost his head. I think there were too many quarrels at home, and one day he really lost his mind. And they had to sort of tie him down and gave him an injection, and he slept for 7 days or something, for 4 days or something. So they had to, and he recovered from his little fit. But then there was another quarrel, and the next morning they couldn't find him. So they looked for him, and they saw the train was stopped on the other side of the bay where the train tracks ran. So they said, oh no. They went there, and sure enough, he had lain himself on the tracks, and the train had run over him and killed him. And when they told me this, my whole system went into a total shock. Not because Christianity said, and the good old priests, Catholic priests said, suicide is, is a crime against God because life is not yours to take. That's what they said. And life is sacred. So I said, whoa, what did he do? How could he come to that point of not valuing? I was just a kid, but I had this thought in my mind. I don't know if the priests were the ones who put it in my head or if it was something more natural, that life itself is sacred and suicide goes against that sacredness. So you must come to a very desperate point to violate that principle of sacredness of life, that it is not yours to take. And he had done it. I had nightmares like you wouldn't believe. And I couldn't walk past his house because there was a deep black shadow hanging over it. And his dog was contaminated by that shadow. And when he passed through the village, I ran away from this dog because he might bite me and I might get the same kind of, evil shadow. As a child. So I saw many connections that maybe logically and scientifically might not work. But that there was a black shadow that could take you over. That must have been what happened to the poor man, and he killed himself. So suicide, in that regard, in the actual fact, you see, that's why the church doesn't bury suicidal people, the people who kill themselves, within the atrium, within the sacred ground. They bury them outside because they have committed the ultimate crime of taking their lives. Now, I'm not promoting the church's view, but I'm saying there's something to this, and Krishnamurti brings it home, I think, not this exactly, but brings home the importance, the sacredness of life, and that we are responsible to that sacredness, and that it is our continuous escaping from life through the abstract living of self and thought that constitutes suicide. I think there's something quite strong in that, in reminding us that we have a real, responsibility here in relation to life itself. That we're talking about living in the world, we're talking not the world first, but living first. And the living means this constant contact, means being alive. And the thought and time and self, leaning on the past, they inevitably create a gap with that life. That they are themselves an escape from life? I almost hear that. That the moment self binds itself to the known, creates a refuge isolates itself from life itself. And that is the fundamental conflict, the fundamental duality. Time is not life. That's the weird thing to say. I'm beginning to say weird things. So you will have to look deeper. Time, the known, is not life because it's part of life, but life goes beyond the known. That's a tremendous thing. We are to be alive, therefore, is to be aware of the known, and to be aware of the known, one must look at it with eyes that are freed from the known. Whoa, that's what the old boy is saying. I think I hear him saying in these chapters. To be aware of life, to be in contact with life, our eyes, our perception of what is, has to be freed from the past, from what was, because what was is not what is. Maybe part of it, there may be certain features of what is that can be identified and recognized. But if that is our primary focus, then we will miss the new. We will miss the unknown. And life is constantly new. Well, to say constantly new is maybe also a little bit of contradiction. It's just new. Constantly, I don't know. That it is. The newness of life, which is the newness of relationship, of seeing each other. You see, if I just go on my image of you, I won't see you exactly, right? This is what a friend of mine was saying to me. Look, the past allows us to recognize everything so that we can pass quickly by. I see the tree and I say it's a pine tree, so I pass. Like the moment I name it, I've seen it, I go. This is my wife. Finished. I don't look at her. I don't see whether she's happy or not. I don't even notice that she has put on a new blouse, right? Which makes her pretty desperate because I don't pay any attention. So we keep passing each other like ships in the night because we recognize each other, and the recognition is the past. So the past does not see except what it recognizes, the features that it has already acquired, keeps in its own archives. So to relate is therefore necessary to see past that self-referential mirror of the past. It reflects itself to itself. That is very beautiful. I think that's an extraordinary, simple thing to say. What happens in the world, what becomes of our relationships, of our lives, depends on the eyes with which we look at things, at people and ideas. This is the ground of order that we're looking for. If the new is there, if yesterday is silent, then the contradiction does not arise. He says facts are not contradictory. They are what they are. That statement has to be looked into. But the fact is not contradictory. If we can stay with the fact, and the contradiction may be brought by the past, see, by the labels we live in or we live by. Living is not a label. Life cannot be labeled. It's beyond knowledge. Though some features can be identified, but it remains unknown per se. And therefore, we have to bring the same quality to bear on life if we are to live at all. And we have to be free from the time-bound binding principle and the isolating principle of the past that is me. So he made a suggestion there, a very interesting one. You see, so basically what he says is awareness is it. Finished with the story. The awareness. Be aware without choice of whatever it is, which means that emptiness of the past in the I, like he puts it. But then he says this thing, makes this suggestion, a very nice little suggestion, you see, to play with, because Krishnamurti is so impractical, right? So he said, all right, just pay attention all throughout the day and see if you are aware like this, choicelessly, looking out at things with new eyes, the newness itself is the order, right? The newness is order. I was finding this as I was reading these chapters, that in the newness there is order, because there's no separation from it. To look at each other and see the new is the order of our relationship. The past cannot bring us together, though it does in some regards, right? I said, oh, hello, my friends. Yes, but it's the new that will really make the connection. And he says, therefore, do that throughout the day. Be aware what is happening, your reactions to it, the whole movement, inner and outer. And when you're going to go to bed, before you sleep, go over the day. Put order. That is, we are concerned with order. The way of life is the way of order, but it's the way of challenge also, by the way, right? And how we meet it. It's not like be quiet, peaceful, find a quiet place and live there away from challenge. There will never be such a place unless we are able to be so aware that we're able to meet the challenge. And the challenge would be everywhere. As I said, we always take the world with you. So the world is disorder. The way of order is awareness. And you can put order in consciousness by this quality of awareness and by reviewing. Consciousness can also, this was very interesting. It's not like consciousness per se cannot bring order. It might be able to bring order by reviewing it objectively without judgment in the same choiceless way, can review even its own memory and therefore bring quietness and rest to itself so that the brain can renew itself. That's what he says. So that when you wake up next morning, very beautiful proposal, there's not thought and desire that awaken with you, but it is intelligence and love, which are completely different. Thought and desire are from the known. Intelligence and love are from the unknown. You begin from the unknown, from the emptiness of me. And whatever happens then, maybe it's not in my hands. All right, T. We'll discuss.
I don't really want to get started, but I start anyway. So, um, yeah, thanks a lot for the beautiful presentation. With kind of like I'm always astonished how you manage to bring about these any four chapters. You can take any so beautifully together in exactly 45 minutes. So I mean, like without taking notes, it's quite amazing, really. Um, I mean, one point I kind of struck me while listening was like this sacredness of life, basically. Um, it's also, I think it came into the reference with this chapter on life, on suicide, and so on. So, and so the question which I had was more like, is this idea of life is sacred? I mean, is that really like an illusion, basically? Yeah? I mean, we take it for granted, life is sacred. But what we really mean is like human life is sacred. And I mean, I thought about like all the lives we take by killing animals for food, the way that has evolved in the past decades, basically. So obviously, a life of a goat or a chicken is not sacred to us. Yeah. So why would our life be sacred? We are, after all part of that family of mammals. But I mean, we take it completely for granted that life is sacred. So is that really so, basically? So that is like what I was, yeah, the thoughts I had when you talked about that.
Is life sacred? What is just a biological phenomenon produced by the arbitrary combination of atoms somewhere in a wet planet? And, it was not created by God. We are not made in his image, and we don't share in the divine. We just invented something for ourselves. And science has been, banishing the sacred from the earth. It's all mechanical, biological, cause and effect. Nothing has any particular ultimate reason, and life is just a byproduct of a certain organization of matter. Yes? I mean, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe this is the question to explore more deeply. I can't answer it exactly, except maybe to say that we have inklings, that we have had inklings in our lives. Some people have had of states of consciousness in which there was a quality of wholeness to it that was life, that was more alive than anything. That there's a question, a sense of creation, of being that transcends even the creatures. But as creatures, this is the maybe I'm speaking Christianity, I don't know, of the creator and the creature, right? The creature is that what the creator produces. That's how they put it. There's a creative principle. I don't like the creator as, a bearded old boy who's just making, clay figures and then blows into it and there they are, walking about. No, not quite. There must be it's a bit more complicated. But yet the sense of, I don't know, it may be very intuitive, or it may be even a kind of primitive things from the scientific point of view. It might even be like a kind of, how you call it, an atavistic, animistic way of looking at life. But my sense is that actually consciousness has this deeper sense, or has access to those kind of experiences, in quotes, because that's a bit tricky word within the context in which we're speaking, but that there is something beyond, something of an origin, something that stands behind and below and through living things, which is life itself, and that has the quality of the sacred. That's not what the church said, not what the tradition teaches, not any tradition of any kind, but the very encounter with that immensity, with that timelessness, conveys this. I trust that. That's the only way I can speak honestly for myself about that, without any assertion, without any assertion of it is sacred, it is not sacred, is the sense of this is what, as even a kid, I came upon. And the sense of the sacredness of life seemed to me evident from that experience, that there is something profoundly immense, not of our making, not beyond us and through us, in which we are participating if we are alive. What are we talking about? But sort of, can we be fully alive? And is not that quality of wholeness the same or similar to the sacred? Isn't the wholeness goodness? And isn't goodness the quality of the sacred? That's how I would sort of try to move it into one, the experiential ground of the basis of that notion, but also of the sense of interconnectedness of the all with the all. Even there, you could question it and say, why would the all be sacred? It's just a group of things, you know. The scientists have actually deciphered the shape of the universe. It's just a bunch of galaxies stuck in a kind of uh, American football. And that's the shape I remember, sort of thing like this, a ellipsoid sort of thing. Well, and so what? I don't know. Maybe it's just we have to connect beyond concepts with an insight, with a deep perception, with the heart, with something else. Krishnamurti said in his writings that understanding is not only of the mind, but is also of the heart. When the two go together, when you feel things, that's also tricky, by the way. All of this is very tricky. The heart can feel whatever, right? And it's not necessarily true. What we're talking about is whether this is true, whether this is actual. And how will we find out? I'm suggesting that certain states of mind, of wholeness, when there is wholeness, that's this space, the dimension in which this encounter can happen, and that is the feeling of it. That's all I can say. Not convincing, but that's the closest I get myself to a confirmation of such a thing. Right? I can't put it on a blackboard and say X, Y, and Z, and therefore sacred. I'm not saying that. I cannot. Miles. You're muted.
Javier, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. You spoke about being a child and feeling this isolation, and I just wanted to share that I had a very similar sense when I was a child, and it carried on for many many years, probably my entire life. Uh, but there was this sense that what was happening around me wasn't the main show. It was some kind of a sideshow. And that was my felt sense of it as a child. And as I went on sort of participating in this sideshow, it felt like I needed to figure out how to be part of this show, but it wasn't the main thing. And the last, I would say, 5 years, coming out of 9 years of being in addiction, heavy, and really feeling this sense of isolation and coming to what the Japanese might call a kensho kind of seeing of nature, seeing of essence. It's just been just so wonderful. And cognitively, I've come at it both experientially, but both with a curiosity intellectually too. So the cognitive machinery is doing its thing, and then there's also this place where it, what's happening can be grounded directly in experience prior to the mind moving. And I don't know if it's a function of getting older or just my curiosity. And you know what? I don't really need to know those answers. It's just such a joy. And when there's, so many of the wisdom traditions, even Western philosophy and Christian mystics, etc. Things are said, and it just lands in a way of just kind of yeah, that's the way it's always been. And I think of, you know, contemporary person. He said the quickest way out is to know you're not in, which I thought was very concise. And Jesus might say something like, "You're in this world, but not of it." It just resonates at a certain intuitive level now. And then the cognitive mind, speaking about time, I'm so glad you brought that up too, because it seems very clear how this illusion is painted with this kind of abstraction that's just always occurring when time is primary. It's the primary focus. It's the thing that everything is measured by. And when that is not in place, and you gave a couple of examples, with, well, if we didn't have the Bible, look at what would things be like, etc. There's a kind of an openness to what's happening now that just, I don't even want to say it arises, because it's just the base. It doesn't arise, it doesn't diminish, it just is always there. This kind of drone note that everything else is, Now, there's one thing, and I don't know if this is so much a question, but I would say intuitively I have a little bit of maybe you can help me with this. When Christian Murray talks about order, uh, I want to almost reverse it. I almost want to say that somehow the newness is in the disorder. If you follow me, like, order to
Yeah,
me sort of implies a kind of a cognitive equation somehow. Can you help me with that?
yeah. I don't know. Krishnamurti said to help another is a crime.
Oh,
When my master says that to me, I worry about helping anyone. No, no, right, no, but we're in dialogue, right? Looking at things. Order, right? Order seems to suggest the notion of order is a bit tricky indeed, right? Because it seems, the order of numbers. So everything falls, things fall naturally, logically, one after the other. Things have and almost suggest a mechanicalness, like the order of the universe, so called. So that's what physicists are on about. So they said this works like this. This is the gravitational field, this is the other. And so, sort of a fixed order seems to suggest a fixed dynamic. Whereas when we say life is order, the very movement of life, but life is not fixed. We're sort of breaking the notion of order that we normally have. The order of thought is the order of fixation. If the order of succession is the order of logical necessary connection, and that's how we look at nature too. That's how science looks at nature. And he says that the universe is order because it fits into this mold of the fixed, the predictable, the necessary in that way, right? Necessity. Now we're saying life is freedom in the sense that is new. It's not necessarily a consequence. It's not what we therefore can predict. It is disorder from that perspective. And yet we're saying that actually our knowledge, which is supposedly what holds on to order, is the factor of disorder because it brings the former time to bear on that which has no time in it. And by trying to capture it, by reducing the new to the known, it necessarily creates a division because the newness of the known is left out, or the unknown, rather, is left out by reducing it. And therefore, we are fragmenting our own existence, and that is the key to our disorder. We don't meet, you and I, because we have an idea of our identity, of our nationality, our belief, our experience as individuals, the conclusions we have come to, what has shaped our lives, right? You have being addicted to one thing and I to another. And we cannot meet because of our separate addictions. It's a bit like that, you see. The past is an addiction. You see, the identity is an addiction. It's addicted to itself. It's addicted to whatever notion he has borrowed, configured of itself. The self is an image, in great part. Maybe there's more to it. But how? What kind of an image? What is that made of? Right? What projects the image? What shape does the image have? How does it acquire any substance? What's the substance of any image? My image in the mirror, what's the substance of it? Well, it's light that is reflected from a surface and is perceived as something existing out there. But it's not existing out there, it's just a reflection and so on. But it is a physical process. It's something that actually materially has its own laws and its own reality, but is not me in that mirror. It's just an image. And likewise, in consciousness, the image the mind makes of itself, the self, is just an image of itself. And yet it believes it is itself. That's part of our problem, see? So we're saying this knowledge of myself, this idea of myself, is not myself, and yet we believe in it. And that's why the known is disorder, because it takes us away from the fact. Our prejudices take us away from the fact. Our beliefs take us away from the fact. Our self-identity take us away from the fact. That's what we're saying, no? This idea of suicide that Krishnamurti is talking about, which is a weird chapter to put in how to live in this world, but it's still quite pertinent because of this isolation that the image creates for itself, which is the known, and that's what we're not aware of. I think that's part of the problem. We're not aware that our self-image is the known, that the substance of myself as an image is the past. And therefore I'm not as such alive to the moment except through the filter of what was. And what was is the dominant factor. And therefore that's the factor of division between you and me, is our identifications with something previous. Therefore this moment now is destroyed by that past. We can't meet. I'm not sure if we can put it clearer. We might be able to. Judith, help us.
Well, thank you. But the discussion brings to mind something that I try to do sometimes if somebody says to me, tell me about yourself. And I try not to refer to the past. So I try to describe myself without reference to the past. And I find I have nothing to say. There's nothing, because I am so connected to what the past has defined of me. So I find myself, if I really try to stay distance from the past, I can't have anything to say, which is a little bit scary when I try to find a description and there's nothing there because it's all tied to the past. But on the other hand, it's scary, but it's also very freeing, because when I can't refer to the past, I know it's not defining me anymore. That's all I have to say. My internet connection is crap, so I don't even know if I'm coming through now.
Yeah, you're coming through. I mean, to me clearly, very clearly.
Okay.
Yeah, seems to be working better, your internet connection. Right. Yeah. Tell me who you are. And what are you going to say? You of course have to say, there's certain identities, you see, you present them with your driver's license. If you have one, your passport, right? That's what they ask you at the airport, right? Or at the customs. They have to know who you are, right? Because you may be a danger to society. So they have to know. So they have there, and you have your digital things. So there are factors in our identity which are objectively, how you say, verifiable as distinctions. That's how we also work. We have similarities and differences. That's the way of thought. That's the way of classification. Some things are similar to others and some things are different. Some of the differences are the same, etc. I mean, it gets complicated. But basically, we have certain objective factors that can identify us. And we can identify each other pretty clearly. You see, when we look at each other's images, I say, that's James, that's Judith, that's Klaas, that's Andreas, so on, right? Miles, Ralph. And so Susan. So we can identify each other. But what does that mean? Are we seeing? Do I know you? What does knowing mean? That's a part of the question. What does it mean to know oneself? Because this is part of our issue here, right? That self-knowledge is at the heart of Krishnamurti's teachings. That's one general phrase. I would say that. Krishnamurti's teachings are about self-knowledge. But he says to know yourself means to watch yourself without accumulating information about yourself. Now, has he not just contradicted himself in his statement that I'm not knowing myself at all? I'm just observing because I'm not gathering information. And yet, if we were to ask, when we define ourselves, we are defining certain constants, what we think are constants, right? Not just our origins, that we have a date of birth and a certain picture that identifies us in a computer or with other people, or a fingerprint or whatever it is, but also that in our characters, like my voice might be identifiable as distinct. My mobile identifies me through my face. So maybe, I don't know, there may be a similar identical face in the world that can open my mobile phone. Well, probably in China, hopefully far away. So there is that, even mechanical devices, no identity, can identify. So there are certain features that we can say, when I ask you, who are you or what are you? You can say, yeah, of course, I'm not describing my face, right? I'm describing one's character. Now, what is that character? So there are certain features that sort of remain relative constants. So you say, well, you define yourself by, for example, by your function. So that's a field of knowledge and capacity. Then you define yourself by your qualities, not just physical qualities, by psychological qualities, like what interests you. Maybe you are more inclined to scientific approach, to a religious approach, or contemplative approach, spiritual approach, artistic approach. There are certain characteristics, more or less, we can define by our inclinations. Then the habits one has. The habits are one major defining factor, right? And you say, well, what are you? I'm a drug addict. Thank you very much. Anything else you want to know? Well, whatever. You see, the constants, the conflicts also that are internal to us, the dominant feelings. So it is along those lines that we have talk about ourselves, right? I mean, every one of us has a whole book to write about all that background. So we can only talk, that's the past, but we also know that certain things persist. As long as those persist, then we can define. But suppose now Krishnamurti is pushing us, isn't he? Saying if you want to really love, if you want to relate, if you really mean it and you're serious about it, you have to empty yourself of yourself. What are you going to talk about to your girlfriend? You've disappeared. Right? This is a problem. No, Judith? I mean, we're past that situation, but if somebody, a young person, they want to love and they come to this point and they read Krishnamurti and he says, you have to delete your identity, right? And therefore you come to the lovely girl and she says, who are you? You say, well, I'm nobody and nothing, right? I just love you. He said, I cannot love anybody, nobody. So you have to go home and think it again. I have to invent a story. But people only love characters. But there you are. It's an interesting thing because it sort of undermines, seemingly, the very notion of our own psychological identity, of our being someone or something. We maybe still have certain characteristics given by nature, the shape of our face, or even our talents and capacities, how we handle knowledge, the way we speak. There may be those things, but there may be no identity behind it. There is no identification. There is no holding on to a particular concept of oneself as derived from the past. There is a fixed image definition of what I am. That the I am is empty of this past content, and therefore much more open to life, much freer, and undefinable. We become undefinable. Is that scary? We lose our borders. But don't we know also that, I mean, I was just remembering a few days ago that actually when I've been happiest in my life, if that's the word, is when I had no borders. I couldn't even define myself. I couldn't find myself. And when this, indeed, this was sort of like that. And then I would wake up and say, where was I? Who was I? But I was just in that movement of contact, of perception. And I remember those, if remembrance is of any worth in this instance, as the happiest times in my life, because there was not the friction of being me versus being others or any of that kind. So, in fact, the non being was me in the sense of the being was in that area of non definition, non identification. And that was joy. That was joy. So, what do we want? To relate from this me and suffer the consequences, or not be and then meet joy? I'm not sure it's a choice, but it is actually something life throws at us. It says, you are happy when you are not. And when you are tied to your own image, you can expect sorrow. Huh? I'm not saying yes or no, just the question. Sorry, James.
Yeah. So one of the sentences in the suicide one towards the very end, it says, and this is about what we're talking about. What is really exciting and true is to find out for oneself a way of life that is highly sensitive and supremely intelligent. So highly sensitive, supremely intelligent, and not there, as you were just saying.
And not there.
Well, when you're not there, love is, and things like that. But so what is he pointing to with the highly sensitive and the supremely intelligent?
Right? What is he pointing to?
I'm asking, yeah. It's a don't know kind of thing.
I'm also asking. We're all asking. Let's see, but together we can discover. What's he pointing to? What did he say? Highly sensitive?
It's a way of life that is highly sensitive and supremely intelligent. It's really exciting and true to find out for oneself a way of life that is highly sensitive and supremely intelligent. And there's no manual for that. There's no how to do this.
Exactly. The how in the question was already irrelevant. That's right. Yes. The real question is to live without time, which is to have a great sense of love, for love has no past or future. He puts those together, sensitivity, intelligence, and love. And he says the essence of those is to live without time. Does that mean anything, though? To live without time, I mean, the time we were talking about, maybe? I think he's talking psychological time. Basically, he used to be very punctual with everything. So he was a stickler for punctuality. But he said, no time in you, not the me and its time, not the time of the me. Does that make any sense? Is that the essence of this high sensitivity, supreme intelligence, and timeless love?
The Zen people have a koan. It says, "Not knowing is the most intimate." And I think that gets to it a little bit. If time is the known, if time is not life, according to Kay, then we simply see that the unknown is most intimate. And I think that's what you got to, Javier, when you were describing this happy time of losing of the self, which is created with the substrate of time. That disappears and things become very intimate. You might use the word sensitivity there.
Mm.
So it almost maybe seems contradictory or paradoxical, but the no self is the most sensitive or the most intimate. So how can that be? The no self, how can that be the most intimate? It's just,
Yeah.
I think it's just hard for the head to
Yes.
grasp. You know what I mean? Like to sort of render it down cognitively. It becomes such an abstraction once I start using words to describe this.
Yeah.
Anyway, that would be my
Yes.
contribution to this.
The self cannot acknowledge, is even verbally, that there will be an intimacy without it. that actually happiness would be without it, because happiness is something the self is seeking, and that it appropriates and attributes to itself, right? Happiness, achievement, everything, all the virtues is what it's identified with or wants to identify with. So that is, yeah, what allow also does not allow us to create a contradiction in terms of speaking in the way we were speaking, that the happiness is when the self dissolves. There's a dissolution. And that is the quality of intimacy that the self doesn't seem to know. That's another thing. What is intimacy? What is real inwardness? Krishnamurti talks about, do we have an inward dimension? And we're talking about that. The intimate as the inward. Is the self really inward? Or is the self outward? Or at least sort of in between? An in between entity is neither outward nor inward. Is somewhere hanging in there in a halfway zone. Ah, and we're asking some interesting.
This is part of the seeking, the issue with the seeking mind, or the seeking of a path or a direction to take to somehow discover. It's this idea of becoming. So the word becoming implies time in a sense. And I think it was someone like St. Francis, maybe, or one of those guys that said, like, the self cannot get out of the self. It's just, it's the wrong tool, right? So this whole idea of just sort of discussing our way into an understanding just seems like ridiculous. It's just not going to happen. I'm not going to be able my cognitive machinery to somehow get there. It's just not accessible.
Not exactly, may not be, but it has to be accessible somehow. Otherwise, indeed, we won't be able to get out. So that's why Cake says there is an awareness to us. We are not completely blind. We're blinded, but we can also perceive maybe our blindness. That may be the beginning of sight. To perceive the blindness, what prevents us from seeing, to be aware that we are not aware, right? That we don't see, that we don't relate. And we of course are given, life is challenging us all the time that way, because the moment there is conflict, we know that we are not perceiving. To me, that's the one great alarm, no, in my daily life. If there is an issue, a friction, a conflict, I immediately my alarm goes off and it says, you are not seeing. And so I start looking, and already that helps a lot because the momentum already of the conflict is sort of halted because there is a cause, there is a reflex movement. We have to see something to be seen, something that comes in and divides. So that becomes for me one of the signals. No, we have to become aware of this, and of course, we have to pay attention to all the things in our lives. Kay said something very beautiful at one time. You just have to, how you say, awaken to the danger of the me, where it's creating this division and this blindness. What's bringing about this duality? That naturally creates a question mark, brings a question mark to bear on the self. Therefore, that's attention to the self. It's attention. It's not judging it, not saying yes, good, bad, but being aware of how it arises in our relationships, how it introduces this friction, this division, this duality. Right? And he says, the more you keep watching, and then at a certain point, you catch it, right? Not you catch it, but it's caught, it's seen. You see it. There are these moments, aren't there, in which we suddenly just see exactly how the self is operating, how jealousy arises, how envy arises, how comparison arises, that sort of thing, desire arises, right? All these things are processes which can be seen, but because our attention is drawn to them as factors which are potentially destructive, not necessarily, but potentially destructive. We've seen the destructiveness of these things, right? So that brings attention to bear. As the attention works, these things don't arise. The awareness of what is dissolves what is. This phrase is very mysterious in K, that the awareness of what is psychologically dissolves what is. I leave it there, mysterious for the next time. But that is very beautiful. I think it has happened to us in certain occasions when we bring attention to bear because of the danger they imply on these things without condemning, without rejecting, suppressing, sublimating, justifying, none of it, because it's processes and these things don't work. Then they are seen and they are dissolved in the act of seeing. It's most remarkable, mysterious thing. He's pointing to that, the perception and the undivided awareness, choiceless awareness, undivided attention of what is, dissolves it. It's like a solvent, acid on this thing. Wonderful stuff. Freedom is in that act. Right? And he says, then when these things are not occupying the mind, because that empties the mind of those movements and the contradiction they bring, because then you try to say, I shouldn't be that. So then we spend our lives doing things and saying we shouldn't do them. And that's our life. The corridor of the opposites he talks about condemns us to an everlasting struggle with ourselves, right? So if that's not there, because this awareness has brought to bear on these issues and they dissolve by themselves without contradiction, without having to use the opposite or anything of the kind, then he says there is an attention that is natural, and therefore it becomes much subtler because it's open, not occupied, not self-centered, and then you can hear the subtle things of life whispering about you. I like that expression because this is life is subtle and is whispering. You should be able to listen to the whispers. The ancients had such fine ears that they heard the music of the spheres. I just want something even more earthly, just the subtle whispers of life around me. And then also the inwardness becomes self-evident. And that sense of outward and inward begin to disappear if they don't disappear altogether. That's real inwardness. See, we found it. We discovered it.
What you just went through there is it can be very helpful to a lot of people because a lot of people really are looking for a process. Of course, they're looking for some some entry point into this, you know. And I actually made a card I just pulled out of my backpack, but it says "Conclude less, notice more." And I actually got that from Christian Murdy when I first discovered Ralph and your group here about 4 or 5 years ago. I was questioning something, and someone who I had never met before. I don't even think they had their picture on, but he said, "You don't need an answer." He said, just notice it, and then let it go. And what I heard you say, Javier, is you're now open to the subtleness of what of that whisper, you know, and the attention, which can be so myopic, you know, on this one thing, wanting the answer. Uh, it just draws back. You know, there's a little more of a panoramic view of things. And so, thank you for saying that, because I think that it's a very practical thing that a lot of people can begin with. You know.
All right, good. Thank
Well, it's
you.
a wonderful way to end our session, I think. Maybe somehow becoming open to the whispers, you know. We'll meet again in 2 weeks. And in the meantime, I just wanted to mention that we also have a workshop, online workshop coming up next weekend, which is facilitated by Mukesh Gupta. He'll be joining us from India. And it's called The Flame of Attention. It's again on a similar theme to become perhaps more to be attentive to the whispers in and he'll go into that, I'm sure. And he has a wonderful way of relating to, as well as just like Javier in a very different way, but I really enjoy these workshops with him also. So if you're inclined to join us, then that would be an invitation. So keep well until next time.
Okay, so
Have a
Thank
good
you.
start to the new year.
Thank you,
yeah,
everybody.
right. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.